The Viet Cong scout stopped so suddenly the man behind him nearly drove his pack into his spine. It wasn't a shout that halted him, it wasn't a signal. It was something smaller than fear and sharper than instinct. Something the jungle itself seemed to point at like a fingertip. A footprint, not a stomp. Not the ugly smeared trench print of a platoon trudging through mud. This one was light, precise, almost polite. A single heel, a clean toe, pressed into damp earth as if the man who made it had asked permission before stepping. And hey, before we slip deeper into the canopy with ghosts on our heels, do me a quick favor. Hit like and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps and it motivates the author to keep publishing more gripping, well-crafted stories like this one. Alright, back into the jungle. The scout knelt and brushed away the top layer of dead leaves with 2 fingers. He did it carefully, like you'd handle a snakeskin you weren't sure was empty. The shape sharpened. The edges were too crisp for old. The soil still held moisture in the impression. Fresh, less than an hour. Around him, the rest of the Viet Cong patrol gathered without noise, faces tight, eyes moving. Their commander, a wiry veteran named Hung, whose ribs showed through his shirt like the ribs of an old dog, leaned in. He had spent years studying Americans the way a hunter studies animal trails. He knew their habits, their panic, their arrogance. He knew what they broke, what they left behind, how they moved when they thought no one was watching. But this print didn't look American. It wasn't the broad heel of a GI boot. It wasn't the heavy lug of a machine gunner. It wasn't the scattered chaos of frightened men trying to be quiet and failing. This was one man, or it was meant to look like one man. Hung stared at it longer than he should have. The jungle around them was alive. Drungos calling, insects humming, leaves dripping from the last rain. Yet something about that footprint made the world feel briefly thinner, as if the canopy had lifted and exposed them. Trin Sat, he muttered. Recon, his second-in-command, frowned. American? Maybe, Hung said. 2 or 3, not many. He touched the edge of the print with the tip of his finger. The soil still crumbled wetly. He didn't like it. He didn't like how clean it was. He didn't like the lack of broken twigs, the absence of scraped bark, the way the undergrowth hadn't been pushed aside. Whoever left it had moved through the jungle as though they belonged to it. We follow, he decided. The patrol slipped forward in a silent, practiced line, rifles up, eyes scanning, their breathing slowed. They believed they were hunters. They believed they had a clue. They believed they were close. They were wrong. 100 meters above, on a shadowed ridge choked with vines and wet leaves, a pair of Australian eyes watched them through a slit in green so narrow it looked like the jungle itself was squinting. The footprint on the trail below wasn't a mistake. It was bait. Sergeant Alan McDoran lay on his stomach beneath a fern so thick with condensation it dripped steadily onto his shoulder and ran down his back. He didn't flinch. He didn't wipe it away. To move was to exist, and to exist in that jungle was to invite death. Beside him, the patrol commander, Lieutenant Pike Harrigan, a man with the calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic is just another kind of noise, tilted his head a fraction. McDoran whispered without turning. They've taken it. Harrigan didn't answer with words. He gave one slow blink. That was all. No radios, no chatter, no heroic murmuring. 5 men, spread like a hand across the ridge, each one invisible for a different reason. Tape wrapped around buckles, cloth over metal, mud rubbed into skin not for drama, but to erase shine and scent. The Australian SAS had been tailing this Viet Cong unit since before dawn, matching their pace without ever sharing their trail. And when McDoran realized the VC were drifting too close to a supply route the Australians needed mapped, an artery of movement hidden under the canopy, Harrigan made a decision. Let them think they were pursuing someone. Let them follow. Let them reveal themselves. The ridge they occupied was shaped like a horseshoe, steep and uneven. For a man who didn't know it, it was a trap of slippery roots and tangled growth. For McDoran, it was a balcony. From there, the Australians could watch every angle without being seen. At the western curve, Private George Bluey Masters knelt behind a fallen tree, rifle settled on moss-covered stones. His arc of fire covered the northern approach. His finger rested outside the trigger guard, discipline so absolute it looked like stillness. 10 meters south, Corporal Mark Hale lay flat and adjusted a claymore mine by a hair's breadth. He didn't bury it. He didn't need to. He angled it slightly up, slightly left. Surgical geometry aimed at where enemy feet would step if curiosity became confidence. He covered the wire with wet leaves and pressed the earth down with the back of his hand. Henderson, the patrol's medic and signaler, crouched deeper near the crest. His radio stayed cold and untouched. If it transmitted, it would be one burst, short, coded, final. Words in the jungle were expensive. They counted the VC below like beads, 11 men. 1 carried an RPD. 2 had rank that made their posture straighter. The rest moved like men who'd learned to survive by listening more than speaking. The Viet Cong patrol broke formation slightly, no longer single file. They fanned out, searching, still following the false trail, still believing the jungle hid Americans ahead. What they couldn't know was that the jungle hid Australians behind them. The Australians didn't dig in for a firefight. Their doctrine wasn't built on winning gun battles. It was built on avoiding them, killing quickly, escaping clean. A fight meant time. Time meant helicopters. Helicopters meant eyes in in the sky, and eyes in the sky meant bodies in the dirt. Harrigan raised one hand and gave a signal so small it could have been a twitch. Wait, the jungle held its breath with them. One Viet Cong soldier paused and turned toward the ridge. His eyes narrowed. Maybe he saw something. A shimmer, a wrong shadow, a leaf that didn't sway with the rest. His hand drifted toward his weapon. McDorand's muscles tightened. The world shrank to the distance between his finger and the trigger. Then the soldier turned away. An officer hissed something low. The man moved on. The Australians did not exhale. They did not relax. They simply remained ready, cold and quiet as stones. This wasn't only a kill mission, it was a study. The SAS didn't just hunt men, they hunted habits. For an hour, the Viet Cong continued to advance, following a trail that wasn't real, scanning for an enemy that wasn't there. The Australians watched their pattern. Who led, who lagged, who looked left too often, who kept glancing back as if he could feel his fate creeping up behind him. Then the jungle changed, not dramatically, not with a thunderclap. The shift was subtle enough that only men trained to listen with their skin would notice. The birds moved first. One moment the canopy was alive with whistling and chatter. The next it was quiet, not silent, just displaced, as if the sound had been pushed outward by something unnatural slipping through undergrowth. Hale's eyes flicked to the left edge of his vision. Leaves trembled against the wind pattern. A glint appeared. Maybe a buckle, maybe sweat, maybe the smooth curve of a metal canteen. Wrong, he whispered, barely audible. They're flanking. McDorand didn't answer. He shifted his weight by 2 inches, slow as the minute hand of a clock. Harrigan's jaw tightened. The Viet Cong had taken the bait, then realized it smelled wrong. Now they were hunting the hunter. But there's a difference between being hunted and being caught. The SAS had rehearsed this scenario 100 times in training grounds back in Australia, and 100 more times in the unforgiving scrub around Nui Dat. Tracking was a blade that cut both ways. It wasn't just about reading trails. It was about knowing when you'd left one. Harrigan gave another signal. Disperse. Reset. It wasn't retreat. It was discipline. One by one, each man slid backward as if the ridge itself were swallowing them. No snapping twigs, no scraped bark, no whispered curses. In 2 minutes, the ambush position was empty except for leaves that slowly lifted where bodies had once pressed them down. The Viet Cong flank element arrived at the ridgeline and found nothing, just damp earth and the faint, unsettling feeling that something had been there. McDorand's patrol regrouped 300 meters away at a secondary observation point above a dried creek bed. Henderson scanned radio traffic with his eyes, not his equipment. He didn't lift the handset. He didn't need to. Sound traveled strangely in that jungle, so did bad luck. The problem was worse than flanking. The VC had split. 2 search elements now moved in wide arcs. Slow, sweeping, methodical. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a grid. The kind of pattern you used when you suspected your enemy was still close. They were learning. That meant the Australians had to get colder. No movement during daylight, no radios, no cooking, no whispers, no careless breathing. They lay motionless in mud, under roots, behind termite mounds. Their bodies slowed to a crawl, their breath measured against wind gusts. Sweat ran, tickled, pooled, dried. Ants walked over sleeves. Leeches found warm places and drank quietly. Henderson kept a plastic bag tucked close. If you needed to piss, you did it in silence. If you needed to bleed, you bled without noise. The jungle was a living microphone, and the VC were good listeners. By the 3rd day, the Viet Cong had passed their new position twice, each time closer, each time louder. They were tired. Jungle fatigue worked both ways. Even with numbers, the green suffocated discipline. Boots slipped, voices snapped, equipment clinked. Somewhere between heat and fear, men got sloppy. McDorand's patrol didn't. For 36 hours, they ate in silence, dry rations, chewed slowly. They moved less than 2 meters total. Even their breathing was synchronized to the wind, like swimmers timing themselves with waves. This wasn't hiding, it was preparation, because the kill zone had already been chosen. A narrow bend where an animal trail split into 3 just below a false ridgeline covered in dense lantana. It looked unremarkable, just another piece of jungle that would swallow you whole if you didn't respect it. But everything about it was deliberate. Loose soil shifted to misdirect steps, a few saplings were cut and angled to funnel movement. Claymores were positioned low and tilted up with the kind of precision you'd expect from a surgeon, not a soldier. Behind them, the Australians lay in the roots with eyes open and rifles steady. The goal was not to fight, it was to end the fight before it began. At first light, the jungle began to speak again, not with words, but with weight. Leaves shifted, insects scattered, the air thickened with presence. One by one, Viet Cong scouts emerged into the kill zone, weapons slightly lowered, formation staggered. They moved with the casual caution of men who believed danger was always ahead, never beneath their feet. The Australians did not fire, because this was not the column they wanted. They waited, hearts slowed, sweat ran in thin lines down unmoving necks. The scouts paused near the split, muttering. 2 crouched to inspect a trail mark. 1 lit a cigarette, the ember briefly glowing like a tiny lighthouse. Still no shot. Then came the second element. More men, heavier weapons, rank patches visible, a radio man with a satchel, officers close together, heads bent, moving like men who believed their decisions mattered. Those were the ones you didn't want to merely scare. Those were the ones you wanted to erase. McDorand felt Harrigan's presence beside him like gravity. The lieutenant's pinky tapped twice against his trigger guard. Signal sent. Safety off. What happened next didn't sound like war. It sounded like the jungle ripping itself open with one sharp breath. fast. 7 claymores detonated almost as one. 39 steel ball bearings per mine, all converging at waist height with brutal geometry. There were no heroic screams, no dramatic last words, just impact, bone, air. A radio man folded without understanding why. An officer's mouth opened, then closed forever. A man with an RPD tried to swing the barrel up and found that his hands were suddenly no longer in the right place to do it. The Australians didn't fire rifles immediately. They waited for movement the way you wait for a snake to prove it's dead. One VC stumbled through the white mist of shattered leaves and blood. A single suppressed shot ended him. 9 seconds, from initiation to silence. Then the jungle swallowed the noise as if it had rehearsed the act. The Australians moved instantly, not forward with greed, not with the swagger of winners, but with the economy of men who know the next danger is the one you can't see yet. They didn't take trophies. They took what mattered. Maps, satchels, enemy logs, a cigarette packet from the radio man, folded paper inside marked with times and routes in tight handwriting, a small radio component smashed under Hale's boot to make sure it wouldn't speak again. 2 minutes. Then they were gone. They ghosted backward down an extraction trail planned days earlier, every man moving as if on rails. No snapped branches, no hasty breath, no shiny objects left behind, not even a casing. By sunrise, the kill zone was still. Blood soaked the underbrush. Flies began to gather like an uninvited debrief, but the men who had made it were already deeper in the trees, tracking again. Because for the SAS, a perfect ambush was never the end of a mission. It was the beginning of the next hunt. They exfiltrated clean and returned to Nuidat the way shadows return to walls, quietly without announcing themselves. When McDoran's patrol finally sat down in the low-lit operations tent, there were no high fives, no cheers, no loud retellings, just steam rising from dented mugs, a few murmured reports, silence. The intelligence officers leaned in, hungry for details. Enemy movements, unit identifiers, weapon markings, terrain notes. Henderson spoke in clipped phrases. Hale pointed at a map with a dirty fingernail. Masters said almost nothing. McDoran laid the cigarette packet on the table like it weighed more than bullets. The inside held a hand-drawn sketch of patrol routes and timings, proof that the enemy wasn't wandering. They were probing, searching, feeling along the edges of something. One of the officers squinted. They were looking for something, he said. McDoran corrected him without raising his voice. No, he said, they were being watched by something. That was the truth of how the SAS thought, not in contacts and kill counts, but in shadows and rhythms. When the enemy moved, the question was always, why here? Why now? Who's watching whom? In Borneo, they learned patience. In Malaya, they learned subtlety. But in Vietnam, those lessons weren't taught kindly. They were carved into muscle memory. Because here, mistakes weren't punished. They were obliterated. And the easiest mistake was thinking like a soldier. The SAS didn't. They thought like predators pretending to be leaves. One of the most important insights from that mission wasn't written into any report. It spread the way real doctrine spreads, whispered between patrol leaders, passed down like gospel. Don't ambush them where they are. Ambush them where they think they're alone. Because the jungle in Phước Tuy had a strange gravity. Men weren't just killed by mines and bullets. They were drawn into killing zones by routine, by comfort, by the belief that a harmless bend in a trail would always remain harmless. That VC unit never expected contact there. They had passed that split 3 times that week without incident. That's why they died there. It wasn't an ambush shaped by impulse. It was an ambush shaped by information. Over the next months, SAS teams across the province repeated the method. Track, understand, let the enemy relax, then erase them. Never twice in the same place. Never with a trace. To the untrained eye, the triple canopy jungle was an obstacle. Thick, wet, chaotic. To American infantry, it was enemy terrain. To the Viet Cong, it was home. But to the Australian SAS, it was a tool. They didn't just move through it, they listened to it, they studied its moods, they learned its language. Light filtered green and dim through dense overgrowth, sound warped in strange ways. A snapped twig could echo for meters, a whispered breath might vanish entirely. Rain fell in sudden sheets, steam rose from the ground like smoke. The forest floor was a shifting patchwork of mud and roots and quiet. To survive there, the SAS became part of it. They taped down every metal buckle to stop clinks. They blackened anything reflective. They dulled stitching. No white, no shine, no noise. Before missions, they rubbed mud into hands and faces, not to look fierce, but to erase scent. The enemy wasn't always watching, but he was always smelling. Cigarette smoke, canned rations, sweat, any of it could betray you. Nature, if used properly, could hide you better than any net. They timed movement with gusts of wind. A loud bird call wasn't just background, it was cover to slide a boot forward. When the forest went quiet, they stopped. Every bird, monkey, and insect was a tripwire. And if the bird stopped singing, it meant someone else was nearby. We never walked on the trail, one trooper said later. That's what they expected. We walked beside it, uphill, downhill, through the thickest scratchy rubbish. Let the jungle tear at us, because the alternative was death. They learned to disappear 5 meters from an enemy and let him pass. Not because they were afraid, because the moment wasn't right, because patience was a weapon and time was a trap. The Viet Cong weren't naive. They had fought the French. They'd studied Mao and Sun Sun Tzu. They were experts in concealment and infiltration and asymmetric war. But nothing prepared them for the Australians. By late 1966, whispers of a new kind of enemy spread through VC ranks in Phước Tuy. Stories of units being tracked without knowing. Sudden, precise ambushes where no one survived long enough to return fire. Dead men with no signs of a fight, just bodies and silence. They began calling them ghosts. The Australians had become more invisible than the Viet Cong themselves, and it terrified them. Attempts to counter it failed. The VC assigned rear guards, flank scouts, larger patrols. The Australians adapted. They didn't attack from behind. They moved with the VC like a second shadow. When the VC tried to set their own ambushes, the SAS avoided them, reading disturbed trails and unnatural stillness the way a wolf senses a trap. They didn't fight where the enemy was ready. They fought where the enemy was comfortable and turned that comfort into panic. As losses mounted, the VC escalated. Platoon-size sweeps, more sentries, camp rotations, night movement, route changes daily. Still not enough, because the psychological damage was always bigger than the body count. It wasn't only how many the Australians killed, it was how they killed and how they left nothing behind but fear. Captured documents began mentioning denied sectors, places avoided not because of confirmed contacts, but because of rumors, movement glimpsed, men disappearing, the sensation of being watched. 5 men could deny movement to entire groups without firing a shot, and the jungle helped them. The jungle was never truly silent, but when it felt unnaturally quiet, the VC learned to fear it. They knew something colder was out there, something that didn't move unless it had already decided to kill. And by the time you heard the claymores click, the jungle had already chosen its side. Years later, when the last Australian SAS patrol left Vietnam, October 1971, there was no ceremony, no headlines, just 5 sunburned, quiet men climbing into a helicopter that hissed hot exhaust across tall grass. As the blades spun up, the jungle gave nothing away. It had watched them arrive, now it watched them leave. But not everything left with them. In Phước Tuy, their footprints faded, trails grew over, base camps were swallowed by humidity and vines, deadfall and rain erased the physical signs of what had happened. But the legacy stayed, in doctrine, in whispers, in the shape of how wars would be fought long after. What the Australian SAS brought wasn't only a tactic, it was a philosophy, discipline, patience, deep understanding of terrain and behavior, a way of fighting that didn't seek to overpower, but to outthink, to win not through noise but through pressure, to know when not to shoot. They didn't chase victory, they waited for it. They shaped the conditions until it became inevitable. And sometimes, the loudest thing on a battlefield wasn't gunfire at all, it was the silence left behind.